Textile designers have an outsized but often subtle impact on our lives. We dress ourselves and our homes in their ideas. Their designs become the background to the way we live, from curtains to carpets, from dresses to dish towels. And yet the designers themselves usually remain anonymous, unseen hands that play a vital role in the shifting scenery of our years. In the 1960s, people listened to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They dressed in Mary Quant and Bieber, and their textiles were created by a talented cohort of largely women designers who came out of the British art schools. Foremost amongst them at that time of breaking boundaries was a young designer called Barbara Brown. Her crisp, geometric designs captured the energy and freshness of the early 1960s like no one else. And even today, 60 years on, they have the capacity to transport us straight back to that time. Barbara Brown is 90 now, and in more ways than one, she's a great survivor. Painting and gardening are what take up her time now, rather than textiles. But she's part of an important generation of British designers who shaped the look and feel of the late 1950s and the 1960s, with its heady mix of optimism, experimentation and rebellion.
I was told to go to art school. I didn't choose it. I just was told, you're going to art school. They must have seen something in what I was doing, but I didn't choose anything. I haven't really chosen anything right through my life. It's always happened to me.
It may just have happened, but her work was central to the emergence of London as the centre of the swinging 60s.
Her role was vital. It is not for nothing that Barbara Brown was called the Golden Girl of Heels. What's so wonderful with Barbara is there are key people at key moments who are able to personify critical moments of cultural change. And to my mind, Barbara is that personification.
It's not just her designs that were important, it was her role as a teacher too.
Oh, I'd say that Barbara is really the responsible person for me going into wanting to do textiles and the enthusiasm for textiles that I've had all my life.
Barbara's textiles are almost immediately recognisable. They're very different from the work of many of her contemporaries. There's nothing sweet or cosy about her work. These were often giant, swooping designs that took up the full width of a repeat, or smaller architectural shapes mixed together in muted black, browns and greys. And in the late 1950s, this was revolutionary. Barbara Brown is important, partly because she comes from a generation of homegrown talent. These designers were the product of the British post-war art schools. They weren't wartime migrants who'd been educated in Europe, and they had something completely new to say.
I wanted to be a sculptor.
And tell me how that came about.
Well, I was at college at Canterbury, and I just loved doing sculpture, and I loved drawing. But they said, no, you're a woman, you can't do sculpture, you have to be a textile designer. Oh, okay. Because, you did what you were told then. And so I became a textile designer. But they always were rather large and rather difficult to live with.
What did you feel when you were told that?
difficult to say, but I didn't feel anything. I just accepted it because I'd been brought up in care and I always had done what I was told to do.
So how did that affect you?
Well, it's affected me all my life, obviously. It's one of the reasons why I'm unsure of all this. You know, I am unsure the whole time of myself, and I don't believe that this is even worth it.
Do you believe your designs are worth it?
Not entirely, no.
But they're very beautiful.
But even so, I don't. I just see what's wrong with them.
I think every artist does that, though, don't they?
Yes, I think so. I hope so.
Do you see, even now, perhaps what you could have made better?
Oh, yes, all the time. Not that I look at them, and I mean, I have no feeling of wanting to keep archives or anything like that. As, even on the first one, you were Tom Worthington always gave you a piece of the cloth, and most people kept them. I didn't. I threw them away immediately.
Well, go on, just explain why you threw them away.
Because I didn't want them.
Why not?
Didn't see any point. I've always been a thrower away of everything. I don't hoard, I don't collect anything, except for stones.
And unlike most artists and designers, Barbara hasn't kept a single thing from her days as a textile designer. In her house, there are almost none of her notebooks. She doesn't even have any of her fabrics. All of it has been thrown away. The fabrics we looked at on the day we filmed, we brought with us. What does remain, though, is her extraordinary fascination for stones, rocks, and engineering.
I've always been interested in geology, really interested, to the extent that I've done a course with the great courses. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. And if you look at them, a lot of them are influenced by geology, you know, the movement of rocks and that sort of thing. I don't mean small rocks, I mean big things. And so that's where that all came from. And I've also been interested in that sort of engineering drawing. I love it, that preciseness of it. Completely wrong for textiles in a way. And also, I mean, there was one of my big black and white ones. It was very large and very jazzy, and you know, and they put it all around the lecture hall at Manchester University, and all the students complained because it was so jazzy round the edges that they couldn't concentrate on the lecture.
London wasn't much fun in the 1950s. It certainly wasn't the wealthy and glittering city it seems today. It was pockmarked with bomb sites. Most of the buildings were covered in industrial soot, and rationing was still in place. But it was the textile designers early in the decade who were among the first to begin to change this.
After I left the school, I was at Canterbury, I went into digs, and you know, it was my first time out in the big wide world, and I was in Canterbury in an old junk shop, and I was in the top room, and she had to lock the door from the outside of my room every night. When I think about it now, it was such a fire risk because they were all the very old houses, and they could have gone up in flames, and I'd been locked up in that room
For several years.
And she used to feed me, and it was always dripping on toast was my main meal of the day.
Barbara, I'm surprised you survived.
I am too.
She did more than survive, though. She thrived and was accepted onto the textiles course at the Royal College of Art. In those days, one of just a handful of students to win a place every year. For a child brought up in care, this was a considerable achievement.
I got a small grant and then a tiny grant from the RAF Benevolent Fund, because my father was killed in the war. And so I got this tiny little grant. I think altogether I got £3 or something. And it just about paid for the cost of my digs and, you know, buying a pair of socks or whatever. But that's it. It was very small, and I didn't think about getting a lot of money. I've not been ever interested in chasing money.
But it was her experience during the war as a child where Barbara first began to see the shapes and forms that interested her.
Those browns. See, I can't bear that. I hate that goldy colour.
And so this wouldn't have been your choice. You hold that end. Let's put this one out and have a look at it.
Again, this is all to do with geological forms, the folding of mountains, the folding of rocks. It's mountains, it's that sort of thing. If you know Dorset, you know at Lulworth, just outside, there's those wonderful folding rocks. Well, that was, my school was, I was at school first in Kent, then we moved during the war down to Dorset, and then we moved, after the war we went back to Kent. In the most wonderful house.
Tell me about the house.
The house was Robert Adam, beautiful house, and Capability Brown grounds. I mean, you couldn't grow up in a better place. And it was Lord Brabourne's house. And there was in the dining room, the most wonderful gold and red ceiling patterned. We used to throw butterballs at it. And you put a butterball on the end of a knife and flick, and it would go all the way up and stick onto the ceiling. I mean, dreadful, dreadful.
But you had access to Lulworth Cove and you could just go outside?
Oh, yes, we were all taken down to Lulworth quite often, and to Durdledore. And Durdledore now apparently is horrendous in the summer. There was never anybody there when I was there. It was just open and it was wonderful.
Frequency is one of Barbara's most important and most successful textiles, even though she didn't like the colours, as it marked a point of departure for her.
Well, I think the evolution was very interesting. Initially, they were very much in a historical timeline of modernism. But as she became more interested in movements like the op art movement, the works of Bridget Riley and others on the continent, she realized that through her textiles within interiors, you could bring something novel and something new and something surprising. Not through blazing color necessarily, but through the subtleties of design. And in many ways, you could argue that some of her earlier textiles were quite old-fashioned, and even the ones that are most exciting, like Frequency, which immediately makes one think of the radar and the electricity. So actually, that textile's a vital one, because it takes us from the early organic work that she was doing into the more challenging world of dazzling your eyes and the op art movement. And so for me, she was able to capture and make accessible complicated issues and complicated areas of what was happening in fine art.
Standing behind all the designers of this period was a man who had a good eye. Tom Worthington was an extraordinarily important figure in the success of British textile design in the 1950s and 60s. He was the design director of Heels Fabrics, an upmarket London store which sold its own original fabric to households and institutions throughout Britain and across the world. What Mr. Worthington liked could make or break a designer's career. He came to Barbara's final year show at the Royal College.
Well, you put all your work up and everything, and then you're obviously marked, and people come and visit it, and that's when Tom Worthington came and bought two from my show, and then from then onwards I was working with Tom Worthington.
You must have been incredibly excited by the fact that he bought two of yours straight off from your show.
I was excited. It was very good, but then he said, I want to see your next year's things, and I didn't do any. So, and then he asked again the following year, and I thought I'd better do something. And he always used to want some work from me every year, and I used to say, yes, I've got some wonderful things happening and all the rest of it, and I hadn't started. And one year, he said, he rang me and said, how's it going? I said, oh, great, but I need some money. And he paid me before I'd even done any, because I hadn't even started. It was always, I'm very much a last minute. I always do it just before it's necessary.
Tell me about Tom Worthington, because he's an extraordinary figure.
Oh, he was wonderful, yes. I mean, he had such a vision. He was so brilliant. You know, the whole Heels Textiles relied on him. He just got a wonderful eye. He was very good.
Did he criticise your work? I don't mean it, but did he say, I don't mean criticise in the time saying, I don't like this, but did he say, could you do this or could you do that? Or did he just accept what you gave him?
He accepted it. And also, I'd sit and I'd do a lot of drawings and things. And he would come along and say, that's good, develop that one. That's all. But he accepted what I gave him. Now, he never asked me to change something. I mean, he asked for colourways every year, and I was absolutely hopeless at it. So his assistant mostly did those.
Why were you hopeless at the colourways?
Because I always thought it only worked in that one way that I'd done it. It was really silly, really, but I wasn't good at it.
Ashley Gray believes it was this partnership between Tom Worthington and Barbara that was key to the development of the textiles and colours that came to define the start of the 1960s so strongly, and remains 60 years later at the forefront of people's memories.
And when he saw her drawings, he knew that she had something extraordinary. And that relationship with Tom Worthington at Heels earned her that title of the Golden Girl. And, you know, it was such a key moment, and he was lucky to find at that single time somebody who he knew He couldn't have invented her, you know, well, perhaps he could have invented, I don't know, but he was able to find a language that they shared, a language that was spoken by everyone who visited Heels. And it made Heels a genuinely international brand through Barbara's work. So she earned that title of the Golden Girl of Heels.
The first design that Barbara sold, straight out of her degree show, was called Sweet Corn, produced in 1958. Predictably, Barbara now loathes it, and it is very different to her later and more structured architectural work. But Ashley has it framed as a picture.
It's the fact that she takes us on this wonderful journey and how painterly it is. It's got that lovely feeling, and you can imagine seeing it done as an oil painting. If that hung against works that were oil paintings by Sutherland or by Moore or by many of those modern artists, that would sit very comfortably. And actually many people would probably prefer it. So here we see it as an individual part of a design. Of course, what one has to remember is that one was actually seeing these within a domestic environment. So there was a lot of that there, a lot of subtle colour that could then be drawn out into an interior. So this piece doesn't make huge demands on you in terms of a domestic piece, but what it does do is it shows you that rooting within the modernist aesthetic, and that she does very cleverly here.
As successful as she was, money was always a struggle, and the system then was a world away from today's marketplace of talent.
When you came to sell these designs, just explain how that worked. Would you sell a design for a set price and then would you get some money depending on the yardage or not?
No, it was only you got a design fee and that was it.
And
then never any more money from it again.
And do you remember how much the design fee was?
No idea. I haven't got a clue how much I was paid.
But it was, you could afford a bit more than dripping and toast.
Oh yes, and also, of course, you didn't ask, I want such and such. You were told how much it was going to be. He never, you know, he said, that's how much it is this year.
Wow. And he would come, you would be drawing this.
Doing lots of drawings with lots of circles, lots of squares, playing around in all sorts of things, mucking around. I can remember doing these sort of things, and I'd put a drawing with a compass and then fill in with Indian ink. So they were scrappy, lots of scrappy bits of paper which I put together, and very scrappy.
And then what would you show Tom Worthington?
The scrappy.
At home or?
At home, yes.
He would come to the house?
Yeah. Well, he would come to my digs.
Almost none of her notebooks still exist. She's thrown them all away, except one, which she gave to a Swiss book collector as a thank you present for a holiday at his house in the 1960s. There's nothing finished in it, but it gives a good idea of the way she worked and how she drew pattern and design out of the shapes she saw around her. It's ended up by chance in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it may be the only notebook of hers to survive from this time. At the same degree show where Tom Worthington effectively hired her, Barbara was also offered teaching work at what was then Medway School of Art in Kent. One of her pupils there was a young truck driver's daughter who thought she wanted to be an illustrator.
I'd already done Saturday morning art classes, and then they try you in different things, like you do one day pottery, one day, trying different things. And I did lino cutting with Barbara, first of all, in my intermediate, and then fell in love with doing textiles and decided that's what I wanted to do. And then Barbara said to me, if you want to do textiles, I'll make sure you get into the Royal College of Art, but you've got to work and do, I will set you homework. And she was an amazing teacher and would set us things like studying architecture in Bannister Fletcher and drawing things up to scale. I mean, she was amazing on what she taught us.
Just explain why she was an amazing teacher. What kind of things would she make you do?
Well, if you didn't do the homework she set, she wouldn't talk to you that week. That didn't happen to me though, so that was all right. But no, she was, and she always looked wonderful. She had this dark hair and she wore black jet jewellery and she wore an overall over her clothes and she looked one's idea of artistic.
Zandra says Barbara is responsible for her becoming a textile designer. And for a young student, she was a real role model.
She sent us early on in our, which was the NDD, which was National Diploma in Design, she sent us on a trip up to Macclesfield and Manchester for a week and organised us staying in a, one of those, what is it, YMCA, isn't it, or YWCA, and we'd stay there for the week. And it was always one of those things you had to get up at 6 in the morning to get the shower because everyone was going into the bathroom. And then we went round Macclesfield and it was always raining and dark and we had to go on the train. But it was an exciting adventure. I'd never been up to Manchester before. And we were seeing the prints by Audrey Levy and Marino Marini. And so it was at a time of a British birth of furnishing fabrics, which was really lovely.
Zandra Rhodes and Barbara Brown are very different designers. Each occupies a separate niche, both in style and time. But that doesn't stop Zandra appreciating Barbara's work.
I think Barbara's important as a designer, very architectural prints that I think come out of that certain period of the, what I'd say, the early 60s, and very strong, just like Barbara, very strong architectural and doing all sorts of magical things. They must have taken ages to work out.
Talk to me a bit, because you're very eloquent about this. How important do you think textile designers are to the kind of look and feel of an era?
I think textile designers are as important as painters. I mean, it's just the fact that textiles, in printed textiles particularly, didn't really come into their own until printing presses and ways of printing were invented, just the same as, say, lithography or whatever. So each art form has to get into its own as a method of being produced. And so I suppose this is an early period of really efficient silk screen printing, and that built up in this country through a lot of, like, the Czechoslovakians and Asher and all that group that came over from Prague and really built up the industry.
But you're looking at people who precede Barbara, like Lucian Day, who I think you met, and then you're looking at kind of a new generation and a new wave of textile designers coming on. How does Barbara fit into that?
I think Barbara will fit in the periods when you go through, like you've got Lucian Day with a wonderful period, and then you've got Barbara's work with all its geometricity, and you've got come into, say, Althea McNish with another sort of look, and then although you go back right to William Morris, well, I mean, we've got a wonderful history of printed textiles in this country.
And you think she sits and deserves to sit kind of quite prominently in that?
I think Barbara definitely deserves to sit quite prominently. I mean, I was in Chicago at the Grand Museum there, and they proudly showed me a couple of my textiles from heels that they'd got. And then they also showed me some of Barbara's. And then I came back and said to Barbara, "Barbara, have you got any more work? I can give them for you."
And what did she say to that?
She'd thrown it all away. She's dreadful. She doesn't save her stuff. So maybe it's going to become even more valuable and rare.
Barbara Brown has earned her place amongst the great designers of the 20th century, not just for the quality of her work, but also because she contributed so much to the look and feel of the 1960s. And in doing so, she took part in a revolution that changed the way Britain thought about itself and altered the way the world saw us.
It was quite the most extraordinary time because, of course, it was all too true that so many women who had an aspiration to be painters or sculptors and the like were often told within the art schools themselves, and quite possibly in the home by their own parents, that, oh, no, 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 that's no, you know, you're a woman, you must go into textiles. And the irony to me of that period is each of those women who then worked in that textile department at that critical time at the Royal College, Barbara studied under Humphrey Spender and others, key figures. They were people who had looked and observed and loved art and sculpture. They had something to offer. And there really was this critical moment when it was the women designers, textile designers, who joined, who really, it was, to my mind, it was a movement, if you like, because none of them were prepared to surrender what they felt about innovation and design and all of this. And each of them found their own role. And I would argue that the women led by Barbara from that period, the women textile designers did more to democratize modern art than many of the sculptors and artists, painters themselves, because they had the real challenge. They had to work in such a way that brought things into the domestic home and at an affordable level, things that were accessible. But they didn't surrender, because they didn't then try to make pretty pieces because they thought that might appeal. They stayed true and loyal to what they believed in.
But for Barbara herself, the sense of diffidence remains about her work. And at the age of 90, it's hard to persuade her otherwise.
I've never gone out of my way to say, aren't I good, or anything like that. I mean, I've never been. It's hard to describe. I've always been so unsure of it.
But do you understand that they are beautiful and very much of their time?
I can see that they're very much of their time, yes.
But not beautiful, or the
Well,
product?
no, because I can just see what's wrong.
And even looking back at them now from this distance, I mean, we're talking 50, 60 years since these were done.
I know, it's extraordinary. I always forget how long ago it all is. But no, I can see that they're very much of their time. I mean, nobody would have anything like this now, would they?
I think they've all come back.
Oh, shit.
Oh.
Others, though, are better able to put her work into context and understand her influence.
Her visual images, when you see them, from the earliest textile works that are rooted in the evolution of modernism, through to the more monumental works, and then works that play and dazzle your eyes. She brought these extraordinary moments into people's homes. And by bringing into people's homes, she broadened an understanding of so many disciplines. And I think she brought something surprising, something original, and something so contemporary that even today, when you look at these textiles, they are eye-popping for a good reason.
Happy birthday, Barbara, and thank you for being one of the most wonderful influences to my life.
There's a strange balance between the boldness of Barbara's fabrics and the reserved and often uncertain person who created them. But as she reaches her 90th birthday, the strength and integrity of her designs still shine out of her fabrics. And now it's possible to see her work as something more than a fleeting taste for fashion, and instead as a proper chapter in the story of the people's art.